Soviet pilots had a nickname for it: Kitovyy, the whale. Fat, slow, absurdly underpowered for a jet. When they spotted one lumbering through Korean airspace in late 1952, they'd radio back jokes. Some guy in a MiG-15 allegedly told his wingman it looked like someone strapped engines to a shipping container. The laughter stopped around November. That's when the whales started killing them. The Douglas F3D Skyknight wasn't supposed to be in Korea at all. Navy built it for carrier operations, which tells you everything about its design philosophy. Survive a deck landing. Don't win beauty contests. Crews called it the drut, which I'm told is turd backwards, though that might be apocryphal. Doesn't matter. The thing looked like a pregnant fuselage with stubby wings and two Westinghouse J-34 turbojets that produced all the thrust of an asthmatic lawnmower. But it had radar. Not the primitive tail-warning stuff most fighters carried. Real intercept radar. The Westinghouse AN/APQ-35, tucked into that bulbous nose, could track targets at ranges the Soviets didn't think possible for airborne systems. The Marine squadrons flying them, VMFN 5113 mainly, call sign Flying Nightmares, had two-man crews. Pilot up front, radar operator behind him in a compartment so cramped he had to crawl in through a belly hatch. Soviet doctrine didn't account for this. Their night bombing runs over Korea followed patterns established in World War II. Visual navigation, known landmarks, get in fast and get out. MiG-15s provided top cover, trusting their speed advantage. Nobody trained them on what to do when an American radar set paints you from 12 miles away in total darkness. The first recorded kill happened November 2, 1952. I won't pretend to know what Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Kitovyy was thinking when his RO, radar operator, called out a contact northwest of Pyongyang. The intercept took 14 minutes. Kitovyy never saw the target visually, just followed the steering directions coming through his headset, closed to firing range, and put a burst of 20 millimeters into something that exploded orange against the clouds. Wreckage confirmed it was a Yak-15. The Air Force refused to credit it officially for 3 weeks because nobody believed you could shoot down an aircraft you never actually saw with your eyes. Here's what the Soviets didn't grasp. The Skyknight wasn't fighting them in a dogfight. It was hunting. Slow didn't matter when you detected the target first. Maneuverability meant nothing when you ambushed from a firing solution the enemy couldn't see coming. The F3D's 420 mm cannons sat in the lower fuselage. No gun harmonization issues, no convergence point to calculate. Point and shoot. By December, Marine crews were getting multiple intercepts per mission. The MiGs kept coming, kept flying the same routes, kept assuming their speed made them untouchable. Soviet commanders apparently never revised their tactical doctrine, which strikes me as either incredible arrogance or catastrophic institutional paralysis. Probably both. January 1953 was a bloodbath. The kill board at K6 Air Base started filling with red stars. 6 confirmed in 1 month, all at night, all beyond visual range. The Skyknight became the only jet aircraft in Korea with an exclusively nocturnal air-to-air record. Air Force pilots flying F-94 Starfires, supposedly the premier American night fighter, watched their Navy counterparts rack up kills and quietly seethed. Soviet intelligence eventually figured out what was killing their aircraft. Too late. The nickname changed from whale to something I've never seen translated, but the tone wasn't mocking anymore. Douglas Aircraft didn't design the Skyknight to win anything. They designed it to not die. The Navy's 1946 requirements read like someone's anxiety checklist. All-weather capability, carrier compatible, radar intercept, survivable if one engine quits. Performance specifications came last. Nobody mentioned graceful or intimidating anywhere in the contract documents. What emerged looked like Douglas engineers took a medium bomber fuselage, cut it in half, then attached the smallest wings they could get away with. The wings were straight, no sweep, because swept wings were still experimental, and the Navy wanted something that wouldn't kill ensigns on their third carrier landing. 2 Westinghouse J-34 turbojets hung under the wings like afterthoughts. Each produced 3,400 pounds of thrust, which sounds adequate until you realize the loaded weight was 26,000 pounds. Ed Heinemann led the design team. He'd already given the Navy the A-1 Sky Raider, which meant he understood the service's pathological fear of complicated systems failing at sea. The F3D reflected that. Hydraulics? Redundant. Electrical? Triple backup. The radar operator sat behind the pilot in what was essentially a phone booth with instruments. No ejection seat initially, because those were still experimental and therefore untrustworthy. Just a belly hatch. Crawl in before flight, crawl out after. If something went wrong at altitude, good luck. The Air Force took one look at the prototype and passed. Too slow for daylight interception, too heavy for dogfighting, insufficient ceiling for bomber escort. Their assessment wasn't wrong. The F3D topped out around 480 knots and couldn't break 38,000 feet without wheezing. A MiG-15 could hit 670 knots and operate comfortably at 50,000 feet. On paper, asking an F3D to fight a MiG was like asking a city bus to chase a Ferrari. But the Air Force was still thinking about dogfights. The Marines looked at the Skyknight and saw something different, a radar platform that happened to have guns. VMFN 5113 and VMFN 542 started receiving them in 1951. Carrier trials were mixed. The thing could land on a deck technically, but it required so much runway nobody trusted it on anything smaller than the Midway class. So they based it on land in Korea instead. Crews hated it at first. Climbing into that radar compartment felt like being buried alive. The cockpit visibility was mediocre, all that fuselage blocking your view. And the performance, God. You couldn't outrun anything if a MiG decided you looked interesting. One Marine captain told reporters it flew like a dump truck with wings, which made the wire services and didn't help morale. Then the kill confirmations started coming in. Soviet pilots didn't know what hit them because the F-3D fought outside visual range. The Westinghouse APQ-35 radar could track targets at 12 to 15 miles in good conditions. The pilot got steering cues, the RO called ranges, and the guns fired when the pipper lined up. No swirling dogfight, no energy management, no worrying about turn radius. Just cold geometry and trigonometry. I think the Air Force resented this. Their F-94 Starfires had similar radar systems, but never achieved the same kill ratios. Maybe it was crew training. Maybe Marine ROs were just better at their jobs. Maybe the Skyknight's stable platform made radar tracking easier. Official reports don't say, which usually means someone important got embarrassed. By mid-1953, the Skyknight had erased more enemy jets in night combat than every other UN aircraft combined. Douglas never advertised this. The records got buried in classified mission reports, and when the war ended, everyone went back to talking about Sabres and MiGs and daylight heroics. The whale kept swimming. Korea's air war had 2 shifts. The day shift made headlines. Sabres versus MiGs over the Yalu. Dogfights at 40,000 feet. Gun camera footage that looked good in newsreels. Then the sun set and different aircraft took over. Soviet and Chinese night bombers owned the darkness for the first 18 months. They'd cross the Yalu after 2,200 hours, navigate by moonlight and landmarks, hit supply depots or troop concentrations, disappear before anyone scrambled interceptors. UN casualties mounted. Nobody could stop them because nobody could find them. Searchlights didn't work. Bombers stayed above the beams. Radar-directed Tropaway got close but rarely scored kills. You needed an aircraft that could hunt in zero visibility, track a target through clouds, and kill it before the bomber crew knew they were being followed. In 1951, America didn't have that. Not really. The Air Force tried. Their F-94 Starfires had radar, but early models suffered catastrophic reliability issues. Radar sets failed mid-mission. Fire-controlled systems gave false contacts. Pilots reported tracking phantom targets for 30 minutes before realizing the scope was malfunctioning. One squadron commander admitted they were shooting at ghosts and hoping. The Marines brought a different philosophy. They'd been running night fighter operations since Guadalcanal, F-6F Hellcats with primitive radar sets hunting Japanese bombers in 1943. That institutional knowledge mattered. When VMFN 5113 arrived at Kunsan in August 1952 with their Skyknights, the crews already understood radar intercept doctrine. The ROs had trained for months on the APQ-35 system, knew its quirks, could differentiate real contacts from ground clutter. Soviet bomber patterns were predictable. They'd approach from the northwest, follow the coast south, turn inland at recognizable features. Same altitudes, same speeds, same routes week after week. I don't know if this was doctrinal inflexibility or just poor operational security, but it made them easy to kill once you had the right equipment. The Skyknight patrols ran 4 to 5 hours. Crews would orbit assigned sectors, usually near Pyongyang or Wonsan, waiting for contacts. The RO stared at the radar scope, watching the green sweep, looking for returns that behaved like aircraft instead of mountains. When something appeared, he'd call bearing and range. The pilot adjusted heading, closed the distance, waited for the RO to confirm lock. Most intercepts happened between 15,000 and 25,000 feet. Total darkness, heavy clouds, zero moon. Conditions where visual identification was impossible. The RO would guide the pilot into firing position, usually about 1,500 feet behind the target. 4 20mm cannons, each loaded with a mix of armor-piercing and high-explosive incendiary rounds. Typical burst was 2 seconds. Then you waited to see if something exploded. Major William Stratton got 3 kills in November 1952 alone. All Yak-15s or Il-10s, I've seen conflicting records. His RO, Master Sergeant Hans Hogland, later said the hardest part was staying calm during the intercept. You're watching a blip on a scope, calling corrections, and the pilot's life depends on your numbers being right. One miscalculation and you've just flown your aircraft into a mountain nobody saw. The Soviets never adapted. They kept flying the same patterns, assuming darkness protected them. By December, their night bombing effectiveness dropped 40%. Commanders blamed Kitovyy, blamed bad weather, blamed everything except the possibility that Americans had put functional radar interceptors into the field. Soviet aircrew started refusing night missions. Reports from defectors after the war mentioned pilots claiming mechanical problems rather than fly into what they called the dark zone over Western Korea. The whales were feeding. November 3, 1952. Major William Stratton and his RO, Sergeant Hans Hogland, took off from K6 around 2130 hours. Standard patrol, orbit northwest of Pyongyang, wait for something to appear on the scope. Hogland picked up a contact at 2247. Bearing 315, range 13 miles, altitude approximately 18,000 feet. Moving south at maybe 180 knots. Slow enough to be a bomber, fast enough to be a jet. He called it out. Stratton turned into the intercept. Closed to 8 miles. 6 miles. The contact wasn't maneuvering, just holding course and altitude like the pilot had no idea anyone was watching. At 4 miles, Hogland confirmed lock and started feeding steering corrections. Left 2 degrees. Up slightly. Range closing. They broke through a cloud layer at 3,000 feet behind the target. Still couldn't see anything. Total darkness, no moon. The kind of night where your eyes play tricks and you start seeing shapes that aren't there. Hogland kept calling ranges. 2,000 feet. 1,500. Stratton fired. The tracers lit up the sky for maybe 2 seconds. Then something ahead exploded. Orange flash, debris tumbling, secondary detonation. Stratton pulled up hard and banked away. Hoagland was yelling confirmation, but Stratton already knew. You don't forget what an aircraft looks like when it comes apart. They landed at Kitovyy 6 around midnight and filed the kill claim. Crew debriefing took an hour. Intelligence officers asked the same questions 3 times. Are you certain it was an aircraft? Did you visually identify it? What type was it? Stratton kept saying he never saw the target before he shot it. The radar guided him in. He fired when the RO called range. Something exploded. That's the report. 5th Air Force Intelligence rejected the claim. Their reasoning: insufficient visual confirmation. The explosion could have been anything. Ground fire hitting a decoy, a malfunction in Stratton's own weapons system, spatial disorientation leading him to fire at a false contact. They'd seen radar operators track clouds before. They'd seen pilots report kills that turned out to be flares. Without wreckage or visual ID, they weren't crediting it. The Marines were furious. Hoagland's radar track was clean. Consistent bearing, steady altitude, Doppler signature matching an aircraft. Ground observers near Pyongyang reported an explosion at the right time and location. But Air Force doctrine still required visual confirmation for air-to-air kills, a rule written when radar was primitive and unreliable. 3 weeks later, a patrol found wreckage. Yak-15 components scattered across a hillside northwest of Pyongyang. The debris field matched Stratton's reported intercept location within 2 miles. Someone at 5th Air Force quietly upgraded the claim to confirmed without issuing a press release. This happened again in December. And January. Skyknight crews would report radar-guided kills. Intelligence would reject them. Wreckage would turn up later. The Air Force seemed institutionally incapable of accepting that you could shoot down an aircraft you never actually saw. I think it offended their sense of how air combat worked. Fighter pilots were supposed to be hunters, eyes sharp, reflexes fast, courage tested in visual dogfights. Letting a radar operator in a dark cockpit guide you onto a target you couldn't see felt like cheating. Or maybe just felt like the future, which is worse. By February 1953, 5th Air Force stopped rejecting Skyknight kill claims. The evidence was overwhelming. The Marines had developed a night intercept capability the Air Force couldn't match, using an aircraft the Air Force had already rejected as inadequate. Nobody wanted to talk about what that implied for the F-94 program or the millions spent developing it. The MiG-15 was a better aircraft than the Skyknight in every measurable way, except the one that mattered. Soviet engineers had built something genuinely impressive. Swept wings, a Klimov VK-1 engine producing 550 pounds of thrust, a service ceiling above 50,000 feet. It could hit Mach 0.92 in a dive. American test pilots who flew captured MiGs admitted the thing handled beautifully, responsive, stable, forgiving of mistakes. In daylight, against Sabres, it was competitive. Sometimes better. Against the Skyknight, it was a flying coffin. Speed means nothing when you don't know you're being hunted. The MiG-15's climb rate was exceptional, 10,000 feet per minute under the right conditions. Worthless when the guy tracking you already knows your altitude, heading, and airspeed before you cross the Yalu. Maneuverability? The MiG could outturn almost anything America fielded. Hard to exploit when 20mm rounds are tearing through your fuselage before you realize someone's behind you. Soviet pilots trusted their speed. That was the doctrine. Get in fast. Deliver your bombs or provide escort. Get out before the Americans could react. Night missions were supposed to be safer because American radar was primitive and their night fighters were scattered and ineffective. Intelligence reports from 1951 supported this. Then 1952 happened, and suddenly aircraft were disappearing. The reports I've seen from Soviet archives, declassified in the 90s, show confusion more than anything else. Pilots would report mechanical failures or navigation errors. Nobody wanted to admit they'd been shot down by something they never saw. One MiG-15 pilot who survived a Skyknight attack described it as being hit by anti-aircraft fire at bomber altitude. He literally didn't believe it was an aircraft until the debriefing. Here's what kills me. The Soviets knew about radar intercept systems. They'd captured German equipment in 1945, studied British designs, developed their own ground-based radar networks. But they apparently never considered that Americans would put a functional intercept radar on a carrier-capable aircraft and deploy it to Korea. The institutional failure is staggering. Soviet doctrine also didn't emphasize electronic warfare training. MiG pilots received minimal instruction on radar warning receivers, which many didn't have installed anyway. The concept of radar signature management didn't exist. They flew the same altitudes, same speeds, same routes, radiating radar returns like searchlights in the dark. American crews exploited this ruthlessly. Captain James Weaver got 2 kills in one night, January 12, 1953, by positioning his Skyknight along a known bomber route and just waiting. His RO, Sergeant Joseph Minier, picked up both contacts within 15 minutes. Same approach vector, same altitude. Weaver shot them both down before either crew transmitted a distress call. The speed advantage that made MiG-15s dominant in daylight became irrelevant at night. A Skyknight cruising at 180 knots could track a MiG doing 400 knots, calculate the intercept geometry, position for an attack, and fire, all while the MiG pilot assumed he was untouchable. Soviet pilots kept trusting their airspeed indicator right up until the moment their aircraft disintegrated. 5th Air Force intelligence estimated Soviet night operations effectiveness dropped 60% between November 1952 and March 1953. Bomber sorties decreased. MiG escorts became erratic. Some nights, nobody crossed the Yalu at all. The Soviets never mounted a meaningful counter-tactics program. No radar jamming, no escort modifications, no route variations. Just kept feeding aircraft into the dark and losing them to a jet they'd mocked as obsolete. Pride's expensive when someone else is paying the bill. January 1953 was when the Marines stopped pretending to be polite about it. 6 confirmed kills in 31 days. All at night, all beyond visual range. VMFN 513 crews were painting red stars on their Skyknights so fast the maintenance guys couldn't keep up. The squadron scoreboard at K6 looked like someone had gone crazy with a stamp. Captain Eugene O'Brien got one on January 10th, Yak 15, hit so hard it broke apart mid-air. Debris scattered across 15 miles of North Korean countryside. Major Stratton added another on the 12th, his 4th overall. Then Weaver got his double kill on the same night, which I mentioned earlier but bears repeating, because shooting down 2 enemy jets in one sortie was the kind of thing that usually made headlines. Didn't this time. The Air Force press office buried it in routine operational summaries. I think they were embarrassed. Here's why. The Air Force had spent years and millions developing the F-94 Starfire as their premier night fighter. Lockheed design, cutting edge for 1949, radar-equipped, jet-powered. It was supposed to be the future of all-weather interception, and it had exactly 0 confirmed kills in Korea. 0. Meanwhile, these Marine pilots and their ugly Navy cast-offs were erasing Soviet aircraft like they were running a shooting gallery. The F-94 guys flew patrols, burned fuel, occasionally tracked contacts, never fired their guns in anger. VMFN 513 was averaging a kill every 5 days. 5th Air Force started asking uncomfortable questions. Why were Marine squadrons outperforming dedicated Air Force night fighter units? Was it training? Equipment? Luck? Some colonels supposedly visited K6 in February to observe Skyknight operations and left without making an official report. Draw your own conclusions. The Marines weren't shy about their success. Lieutenant Colonel Max Harper, Squadron CO, gave an interview to Pacific Stars and Stripes where he basically said the Skyknight was proving itself the most effective night interceptor in theater. Not one of the most effective. The most effective. Air Force Public Affairs had that quote pulled from later editions. Soviet response was to keep doing exactly what they'd been doing. Same routes, same altitudes, same formations. I've read analysis suggesting Soviet Far East Command didn't believe the loss reports. Easier to assume crews were fabricating mechanical problems than accept that Americans had achieved night intercept superiority. Bureaucratic inertia at its finest. By late January, Skyknight crews were getting so many contacts they started being selective. If the radar return looked like a slow-moving bomber, worth pursuing. Fast mover that might be a MiG-15 providing escort, also worth it. Single aircraft, uncertain signature, possibly just a transport? Maybe let that one go and save ammunition for better targets. This is what air superiority looks like, when you can afford to be choosy about which enemy aircraft you shoot down. The kill tally kept climbing. Captain Oliver Davis got one on January 18th. First Lieutenant Robert Bick added another on the 23rd. Each confirmation required paperwork, witness statements, radar plots, gun camera footage when available. The intelligence officers were drowning in it, and the Air Force just watched. Their F-94s kept flying patrols with nothing to show for it. Their F-86 Sabres dominated the daylight, but couldn't operate at night. The Marines had solved the night intercept problem using an aircraft the Air Force had literally rejected years earlier. Some lessons are harder to learn than others, especially when your ego's invested in being wrong. By February, Soviet night operations over Western Korea had effectively stopped. The darkness belonged to the whales now. The Soviets had warning systems. They had intelligence networks. They had defector reports and captured equipment and every advantage short of actual competence. And they still couldn't figure out how to stop losing aircraft. Soviet Far East Air Force Command knew by December 1952 that something was killing their planes. The loss pattern was obvious. Aircraft disappearing over specific sectors, no distress calls, wreckage found days later with bullet damage. They knew it was happening at night. They knew the Americans had deployed some kind of radar-equipped interceptor. Their response was to issue tactical directives that changed essentially nothing. Directive 447S, dated January 8, 1953, instructed pilots to maintain irregular altitude variations during bombing approaches and exercise vigilance for enemy aircraft. That's it. No electronic warfare training, no route randomization, no escort modifications. Just fly unpredictably and keep your eyes open. At night, in total darkness, against radar-guided interceptors. You can't see radar with your eyes. Soviet tactical doctrine apparently hadn't absorbed this fact. Chinese units adapted slightly better. They started varying their approach times and occasionally used decoy formations. Didn't help much. The Skyknights tracked them anyway. Radar doesn't care if you're a bomber or a decoy. It cares about radar cross-section and Doppler shift. The Marines just shot whatever appeared on the scope. Soviet pilots kept reporting mechanical failures rather than admit they'd been intercepted. One MiG-15 pilot claimed engine failure forced him to eject over friendly territory. Investigators found his aircraft 60 miles inside North Korea with 20-meter holes through the tail section and both wings. He stuck to his story. Command accepted it because acknowledging the truth meant acknowledging systemic failure. The warning signs were everywhere. Soviet signal intelligence had intercepted Marine radio traffic discussing radar contacts and night intercepts. Ground observers reported explosions at altitude corresponding to missing aircraft. Maintenance crews examining recovered wreckage found gun damage patterns inconsistent with anti-aircraft fire. Someone at headquarters should have connected these dots and demanded tactical revision. Nobody did. I think Soviet command structure was too rigid. Admitting the Americans had achieved technological superiority meant someone had failed. either the intelligence service for not detecting the threat earlier, or tactical planning for not countering it, or pilot training for not preparing crews. Easier to attribute losses to weather, navigation errors, mechanical issues. Keep the bureaucracy happy. Keep your job. Let someone else worry about why aircraft keep disappearing. Chinese pilots were more pragmatic. By March 1953, they'd largely abandoned night operations over Western Korea. Just stopped flying there. Soviet units continued for another 2 months before quietly scaling back. No official policy change, no admission of failure. Sorties just decreased until night bombing effectively ceased. The Marines noticed. Intercept frequency dropped from multiple contacts per mission to maybe one every 3 nights. Captain Davis flew 7 consecutive patrols in April without firing his guns. The RO spent hours staring at empty scopes. VMFN 513's final tally was 11 confirmed kills, exclusively nocturnal, exclusively radar-guided. VMFN 542 added a few more. Total Skyknight kills in Korea, somewhere between 15 and 18 depending on which records you trust. More than any other jet aircraft in night combat. More than the entire F-94 program combined. The Soviets never publicly acknowledged what happened. Their official histories mention increased anti-aircraft effectiveness and adverse weather conditions affecting night operations. No mention of American night fighters. No discussion of tactical failures. Easier to blame the weather than admit a fat, ugly whale ate your Air Force. The F3D Skyknight ended the Korean War with the best night fighter kill ratio in theater, and nobody remembers it. When the armistice was signed in July 1953, the press wanted stories about Sabres and MiGs, daylight dogfights at the Yalu, aces with 5 kills posing for photographers. The Skyknight crews went home quietly. No parade, no Medal of Honor recipients, no Hollywood adaptation. Just orders to new duty stations and another assignment. Marine Corps kept flying them for another decade. They proved useful in Vietnam, not as fighters, but as electronic warfare platforms and night interdiction aircraft. The radar systems got upgraded, the crews got older, and eventually the whole program faded into obscurity. Last operational Skyknights were retired in 1970. Most got scrapped. A few ended up in museums where they sit next to Corsairs and Phantoms, and visitors walk past them without stopping. The Air Force never acknowledged that their F-94 program was a failure. Official histories credit the Starfire with essential air defense contributions, despite 0 combat kills. Lockheed kept building them until 1954. Some served with Air National Guard units into the early 60s, protecting American airspace from threats that never materialized. Meanwhile, the aircraft that actually worked, that actually killed enemy jets in combat, got written out of the narrative. I've seen aviation history books that don't mention the Skyknight at all. Others give it a footnote. Navy night fighter, limited service in Korea. 16 confirmed kills isn't limited service. It's dominance. Here's what bothers me. The Skyknight proved radar-guided interception was viable in 1952. The technology worked, the tactics worked, the training produced results. This should have revolutionized air combat doctrine. Instead, the Air Force spent the next decade chasing faster, higher, more complicated interceptors, while ignoring the fundamental lesson. Detection range matters more than performance envelope. The Soviets learned nothing either. Their night fighter development continued along the same trajectory. Faster aircraft, better engines, swept wings. No emphasis on radar capabilities until much later. They kept building MiG variants optimized for dogfighting when the future was already happening over Korea. Vietnam repeated the pattern. American pilots in F-4 Phantom struggled with visual identification requirements while enemy aircraft escaped. Radar-guided missiles existed, but ROE prevented their use. The same institutional resistance to beyond visual range combat that buried the Skyknight's success story continued limiting American effectiveness 15 years later. The crews who flew Skyknights knew what they'd accomplished. Captain Stratton retired as a colonel. His RO, Sergeant Hoagland, went back to civilian life and never talked about Korea publicly. Major Harper stayed in the Marines, commanded other squadrons, never got the recognition he deserved for running the most effective night fighter unit of the war. Douglas aircraft moved on to other projects. The A-4 Skyhawk made them famous, small, fast, successful. The Skyknight became a footnote in company histories. Douglas never marketed it as the jet that dominated night combat in Korea, because by the time that would have mattered, everyone had forgotten. There's probably a lesson here about how military success gets remembered. Flashy daylight victories with gun camera footage make better stories than radar operators guiding pilots onto targets they never saw. Aces